I want to say thanks real quick to everyone that's joining tonight and to those of you who may watch the replay later through the replay link or maybe even on YouTube. Real quick, for those of you who may just be happening across this for the very first time, I've been harassed online, cyberstalked, cyberbullied, however you'd like to phrase it, by a woman for the past over 3 years now, actually. And part of my intent with these weekly shows is to help educate people. And in the process, I'll be sharing my story because what I've learned as a result of going through my particular experience. And my intent is obviously to help anyone who either A, wants to be safer online, or those who maybe want to maybe like in this situation themselves. One of these days, hopefully, I won't be quite so nervous about doing these blabs. But for now, I'm still like really nervous and I trip up over my own tongue sometimes. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about how cyberstalking differs from in-person stalking. And in reality, it's really the mental effect and everything is probably easily very, very similar, maybe alike in a lot of different ways. And really the only thing that's different is the fact that the person doing the harassing, the stalker, whatever you want to refer to it as, is using technology to do the stalking. Whereas in person, they might be driving by your house, showing up at your job, different things of that nature. Of course, real in-life person stalkers can obviously supplement their stalking with technology. And of course, those who start off stalking online can certainly switch over to real life as well. In a future episode, we'll be talking a little bit about stalking laws, online harassment laws in the United States. And so with that, like obviously a lot of like the intent behind like what the person's doing certainly is the same. Jen H., thank you for joining us too. So that's just kind of like a brief little thing, I guess, really on it. And so like in reality, a lot of it is almost exactly the same. But of course, again, just like the technology that is being used to do the harassment. And because this has been such a part of my life for the last 3 years, I have a lot of friends who send articles to me or stories, whatever the case may be. And yesterday, and I guess it's really also too one of those things that you never really, I guess, stop learning about this type of stuff, because as technology grows, as we become more connected with others all across the world through the use of technology, a lot of the types of harassment also change or they evolve and new things come along. And last night I read this article that a friend had shared, and I actually learned something new myself with a new phrase. And I talk a little bit in episode 1 about the different types of stalking with like doxing and revenge porn, swatting, all those different things. And last night through this article, I actually learned an entirely new word called grooming. And I haven't done a lot of research on it because, to be perfectly honest, I was in bed when I was reading this article. But it was an absolutely really, really sad story. And I'll share the link in the chat box, and this will later be on the episode replay list as well, because every week I'm putting together a blog post that like lists the resources that we talked about in a particular episode and all that stuff. But for those of you who have children in particular, I don't want to like freak anybody out by any means. And I'm going to use Jen's comment from last week, is that it's sort of like credit card fraud. You hope it doesn't ever happen to you, but you want to know what to do in the event it does. And I think a lot of times the biggest challenge for parents in particular is we don't necessarily always know what our kids are doing, or we assume that the people that they're associating with are good kids. And this particular story, like I said, I don't want to like freak anybody out, but it's a horrible, tragic story in regards to this grooming. And I am going to go back at some point and learn a little bit more about this term grooming, because last night was the first time that I've actually encountered it. Jen B just like mentioned it. She read the story today. It's just, I don't know. I was just stunned when I finished reading the story. And for those of you that are watching and haven't read it yet, it's basically the story of a 14-year-old boy who spent a lot of his time online gaming. And he was befriended by someone else, I guess whoever's server they were playing on. And ultimately, that particular person, the person whose server they were on, eventually said, hey, like I don't remember exactly what it was, like, hey, I'm moving or something, but I want to like turn everything over to you, like come over to my house and we'll do this. And the kid went over to the other kid's house. I think the kid was 18 or something, and he murdered the kid. Incredibly tragic story. And the mother had actually reported that she felt something was wrong with this particular individual. And from the sounds of the article, it doesn't sound as though like the police really did anything. And part of what they talk about in that article is, would the police have taken it more seriously if it had been a girl versus a boy? So again, I don't mean to like freak anyone out by any means, but knowledge, I think a lot of times is the most important thing for all of us, especially as parents. Okay, I need to figure out how to like get the word out of my vocabulary. Fillers. Here I go. I just did it again. So with the online stalking in episodes 6 and 7, which will be February 10th and February 17th, I'm assuming it's going to turn into a 2-part thing. Maybe it'll just be one, but I think right now there's a lot of information that I plan on sharing with regards to some of the specific different pieces of technology, social networks, etc. So I think it's going to turn into a 2-part in regards to like some of the various things that cyberstalkers can do to obtain information on you, or about your family, even really for that matter. So that part we'll be talking about a little bit more. And with the cyberstalking versus in-person stalking, because it's so incredibly easy for people to create multiple personas online, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Facebook is supposed to be cracking down on new accounts. Allegedly, you're supposed to have to verify a brand new account within 7 days or they'll shut it down. I haven't actually heard of it actually happening to anyone yet. However, Facebook is claiming that they're doing this, so I presume that to be true. So hopefully that'll help cut down on some of the fake accounts that get set up solely for the purposes of harassing or stalking other individuals. The other thing that, hello, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. And if at some point, Ben, Jim, you too, hello. Thank you for joining. And if you at some point are interested in jumping on visually or asking questions, by all means, feel free. So, okay, so I kind of lost my train of thought. So I was talking about how incredibly easy it is to set up new accounts, new personas online. A lot of the social networks, all you need is an email address in order to set up an account. Email addresses, you can get them from so many different places for free. We've got Yahoo, Hotmail, Outlook, Gmail, you name it, you can get an email account for free. And so the barrier for entry with creating these accounts for the purposes of harassing, it literally costs you nothing other than your time to create a new email account. Of course, you have to try to find a username in the example of Twitter that hasn't been taken and stuff like that. And so what happens is people can just set up so many different accounts and can easily just create multiples. As long as you can keep creating email addresses, you're going to be able to keep creating accounts to harass people. And when I initially talked to the very first detective that was assigned to my case, he had absolutely no experience with Facebook, Twitter, anything like that. And so he said, oh, well, can't you just block the accounts? And I tried to explain to him, well, I can block the accounts, but a new one just pops up in its place because all you need is an email address and come up with a name. And lo and behold, you have a brand new account set up. And so what I tried to explain to him was referring to a Chris Rock snippet from one of his stand-up comedy things about bullet control. And I told the detective, I said, when you get home tonight or whatever, Google Chris Rock gun control and watch the video and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll actually put it into the chat box. But basically, Chris Rock's little skit is, if bullets cost $5,000, there would be a lot less killings and stuff happening because there's actually a barrier to entry in order to buy bullets for your gun. And really what that just means is if Twitter charged a minimal amount, or any of these networks really charged a minimal amount, for those of us who intend on using them for good, we probably wouldn't care about paying a nominal amount. Now, whereas like a cyberstalker, for example, with the woman who's been harassing me, I want to say she set up over 60 Twitter accounts and probably, I don't know, altogether, like all the different social networks, she set up a total of over 100, maybe 103 or something. But let's just say, for example, that it cost her $25 a piece every time she did it, relatively small dollar amount, but it would get really expensive really fast. And I know that the networks probably would never ever go that route, but that would certainly, I think, in my opinion, help curb some of the harassment that happens because of the fact that it would actually cost people a minimal amount to create an account. And presumably, cyberstalkers, like everyone else, don't have an unlimited supply of money, and therefore would make it harder, I think, for something like that to happen. With a lot of the other things that like can happen behind the keyboard, I mean, and I talk a lot about like you can be whoever you want to be when you're behind a keyboard and using, your keyboard to harass people. But there are a lot of other things that can take place too. We have, people can be spoofing phone calls. So you could be using phones, and I realize that's somewhat similar to the whole quote unquote like behind a keyboard, but a little bit different because you're actually using a phone to actually call and harass someone, whereas with the internet, maybe you're using social networks or whatever. But the threat essentially remains the same. Oh my gosh, I really kind of wish they would not show the little like people like as they join at the top, because I find it so distracting. I know it's nice like for welcoming people and stuff, but I find it really is distracting when I see the little things pop up and then pop away. And here I go again. I've totally lost my place again. I really appreciate you guys like hanging out with me tonight. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So with regards to the stalkers in person and online stalking, regardless of how the stalking is happening, of course, you want to document everything. If a person were stalking you in real life, you'd obviously, let's say they left something on your doorstep. Maybe they left a package or flowers or dead animals or something of that nature. Obviously retain it if you can. Definitely take photos, preferably photos that have a date timestamp on them so that that part is documented forever. And in the event of, items being left on your doorstep, put them in like a plastic bag. And I say try not to touch them, because if there's any fingerprint evidence on them, that could be useful in helping to identify who left the items behind. And we'll talk a little bit more in a later episode in regards to the different types of things you can use to track and collect evidence with the online stalking. But similar with in-person stalking, definitely want to preserve evidence with day and time stamps as much as possible. In a future episode when we talk about Facebook, and I actually think I have a video out on YouTube about, I can't remember which videos I have done and which ones are just have to be done, the little list in my head. But there's a way with Facebook to capture the day and time stamp, because for like about the first 48 hours, Facebook will just say about 6 hours ago, about 12 hours ago. And from the standpoint of documenting for a potential court case down the road, that's not going to be very helpful, because maybe the court case happens in 3 years. And so 6 hours ago, well, 6 hours ago when? Was it January 27th at 5:16 p.m., 2016? There's just like, it's so vague. So with Facebook, it can be a little tricky to get that, but there is a way to do it with the permalinks and everything. Carrie asked, screenshots on computers, are they time-stamped? I actually, with my Mac, I have found a way to have my day and time show, but what doesn't show is the year. And that's actually something I should look at a little bit more. However, the actual act of screenshotting on a Mac, and I use the Mac shortcuts, the Command-Shift-3, those screenshots are time-stamped with the time that you took them, which is also helpful, because that could actually put some context to 6 hours ago. You know, if it's time-stamped at 11 o'clock in the morning, then you can just go backwards by 6 hours or something like that. But I think once they get introduced as evidence in a court case, that part would be a little bit tricky, just because of the fact that it's not going to actually be shown on the actual screenshot itself. And Jen, I know you're a Mackie person, so if you happen to know how to get the year to show on a Mac, I would absolutely love to know. In the upper right-hand corner, that's where I have mine. And I'm not quite so sure, Carrie, with regards to a PC, but I believe they're somewhat similar with the Macs, where you can get the day and time to show. I'm just not sure if you can get the year to show there either. One of the most helpful books that I read in regards to protecting yourself from like an in-person stalking situation, and a lot of the stuff that they suggest for in-person, I would certainly say to apply to a cyberstalking type thing. There's certainly extra steps you should take in the event you're being cyberstalked, because the technology aspect. But the book, and I'll put it into the chat box, it was actually written by a detective in LA, I want to say. And I was actually quite surprised. He got incredibly detailed. And when I say incredibly detailed, he actually talks about the different types of locks that you can use on your front door and the pros and cons kind of each. So he really, really goes in depth with like the personal safety precautions that you can take in order to like try to protect your house and where you reside. He doesn't go in a great detail in regards to the online type of things, because I want to say that this book was written late 90s or something. I actually had to buy a copy used, because I don't think it's actually in print anymore. But I did notice today when I was grabbing the link, which I'm going to put in the chat box in a moment, I did notice today that it's available on Kindle, which it wasn't when I bought it early last year. It wasn't available on Kindle then. Now it's available as Kindle. So even though the book is a little bit, quote unquote, out of date, there's still some incredibly, incredibly useful information in there for those of you who are looking to tighten up your home security and things of that nature. He also talks a little bit about the like task force that LA set up in order to help combat the stalking situation down there. And I think he was one of the very first detectives that was assigned to the new division once they started it in LA. So he has a lot of like really useful insight for those who, you know, are looking for some type of help with regards to the personal safety and stuff. I'm just gonna put this out there real quick. if anyone wants to join on the seat to chat or anything like that, just hit the button to call in and I will let you on as long as you're not doing anything crazy. Let's see here. What else do we have? Does anyone have any questions, I guess, in regards to either in-person stalking, the cyber stalking, things that maybe pertain to this particular topic tonight, other things that you'd be interested in learning a little bit more about, questions you have that have popped in your mind, stuff like that? If you do, pop them into the chat box. If you type /Q, it'll actually throw them into the question box for me, which is really useful as well. No? No questions? Taking a long time to type them out? Real quick, while I give a little bit of time just to see if anybody has any questions, I'm going to throw the link to next week's show over in the chat box. And in addition to that, all the previous replays, this particular show is show number 4. All the replays, all the upcoming scheduled shows, as well as future topics, can all be found on my website. Also going to throw that into the chat box. Seven Crows asks, one main thing my dad always raised me to be aware of is not allowing myself to look like a victim. I would actually love to know a little bit more about that. Was he referring to, like, if you're walking down the street in the dark to do certain things or something like that? Got it. Did he have like different types of examples he told you to put in place with regards to how to not look like a victim? She also asked, for those of you who aren't here and maybe watching the replay a little bit later on, she can't type that fast. You know, you can hop on and we can like talk. We can see you if you want to do that, if you have your makeup on. One of the other things that she put into the chat box, for those of you who will watch the replay later, however, how that could relate to online presence would be hard. I think you hit on something, though, because there are definitely a lot of things that I've mentioned in prior episodes and will certainly mention on future shows. There's so much that we take for granted, I want to say, with regards to our privacy, whether it's accidental, whether it's intentional. There's data brokers out there. For example, utility companies very frequently sell your information, and that information ends up on sites such as Spokio or Intellis, I don't know how you pronounce it, those pay to obtain information sites. And so something as simple as like registering for a phone. And I don't know that this necessarily applies on wireless, but definitely in the case of landlines, now all of a sudden you apply for a home phone and an address. So your address is there, your name is there, your phone number is there. Phone company sells your information to data brokers. Some unstable person, some crazy pants comes along and decides that they want to get as much information on you as they can. And what do? They pay whatever. I've seen them as low as $1.95. I've certainly seen them a lot more expensive, but let's just say for $10, someone can get all this information on you for something that maybe you didn't necessarily really think that would happen, or maybe you wouldn't want that to happen. And of course, there's the option, for an additional surcharge. Everybody upsells you nowadays, right? For an additional surcharge, they'll put your phone numbers unlisted. I don't know in a situation like that how much that actually protects you from your information being sold to data broker. Certainly possibly worth the extra money. So there's things like that, that's not something that you necessarily have any control over, but lo and behold, Now all of a sudden your information's out there. Then, of course, there's things like I mentioned in a prior episode about I've in the past shared things publicly on Facebook because I wanted as many eyeballs as possible on them from like a business standpoint. And then later on, I'm using my mobile device and posting, totally not paying attention to the fact that I'm posting publicly. And it's a post that I only intended to be just for my friends to see. So something like that, totally accidental. One thing that is of high importance to those of us in the United States who are registered voters is registered voter information is all public record. And in one of the many Google searches I've done on myself and like variations of my name, my phone number, my address, etc., I found, and I don't remember exactly what search it was, but I did find on the front page of Google on one of them was the fact that I'm a registered voter in the state of Florida. And it had my full name, including my middle initial, my date of birth, and my complete street address. Like everything that you need to like register to vote is out there. And there is a voter address confidentiality program. I believe it's available for all 50 states, but you do have to write in to your specific state and explain to them why you want your voter registration information to be secured. I don't know. I personally have not submitted the form yet to the state of Florida. Part of me is just like, screw it, I don't want to be a registered voter because it just seems as though maybe it's easier to not be registered to vote than it is to actually like go through the process of like trying to get them to approve my confidentiality form. So there's all of those little things, and I've just like listed a couple of those as examples of the different types of things that can happen that you just really don't think anything about. And because so much stuff nowadays is going out into the cloud, unfortunately, like there's data breaches all the freaking time. I mean, we have we have so many to count. There's Target, health insurance companies. Anthem, I think, was the largest data breach last year. Secure password keepers, such as I think it was LastPass, that got hacked last year. So as we adopt more and more cloud technology and we become so incredibly, I don't know what word to use, so like incredibly reliant on our smartphones and the pieces of technology that we use. Like it's just all these little things that we're inadvertently putting ourselves at risk. And a lot of times that we 100% have absolutely no control over because we're relying on, you know, the third party, Anthem, Target, LastPass. We're relying on them to protect us. And so when things like that happen, there can be like really crazy consequences, you know, to it. And aside even just from cyberstalking or online harassment, there's of course like the people out there who are looking to make a quick buck as fast as they can through theft. I watched, I'm kind of a junkie when it comes to American Greed, and they have the episodes on Hulu now, which is incredibly awesome. And one of the early episodes I watched was one of the largest credit card, one of the largest like stolen credit card rings ever was a bunch of like really young kids. They were late teens, early 20s. And they essentially, with the use of technology, managed to somehow infiltrate the system and servers at, I want to say Heartland, which is one of the biggest credit card processors in the US. And they were selling credit card numbers that they had stolen through infiltration of the server. They were selling them overseas, and different cards have different values. You know, maybe it's only $1 for a credit card number if it expires in the next 2 months. And I believe that the show said, and this was back in 2008, I want to say. And there are instances, if I recall correctly, on the year 2008, there are instances where credit cards were going for as high as $500 for credit card numbers because they were an Amex Black or something, that the credit card thing, but they literally made millions and millions and millions of dollars off of selling credit card information. And the people whose information was stolen, very somewhat similar to the whole situation with the Target breach. They didn't do anything wrong themselves, except they happened to be shopping, used their card either at a terminal that had been affected, or later on, of course, when the Heartland thing happened, when their server was breached. And what's scary, even in a situation like that, Heartland had an expert come in to assess, to make sure that they had gotten rid of whatever malicious code or whatever these kids had installed on the server. And I believe it was twice, experts, people who are paid to, to be these types of IT specialists and security experts, said everything was fine. And they ended up finding out years and years later that, well, I don't know necessarily it was years later, several months later, that no, really, the script was still running there. And it was so good that these guys had put in that even the experts, hadn't found it. Hello, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining tonight. So let's see. So we talked a little bit about the accidental things that people can find. I'm going to scroll up here through the comments, see if Carrie added anything with regards to advice from her dad. No, she didn't. Which is absolutely fine, of course. Sad face. I'm just giving you a hard time. So any other questions, comments? If not, I'll end tonight's show early. God knows I always have plenty to do, but I'm not saying that to encourage you guys not to ask questions or anything. Okay, nobody's typing. All right, or I presume you guys aren't typing. Okay, so quiet night tonight. I have to get my butt working on getting some guests to chat about things. One, so I'm not so much in the hot seat and tripping over my own tongue, and hopefully get some more eyeballs here, more questions for future discussion items. And as always, I really, really appreciate you guys, your support and everything. And thank you very much. And I'm going to end for tonight. Yay, thanks for the props, Carrie. And thank you again. I really appreciate you guys so much. Night.